The old wooden house stood quietly at the end of Maple Lane, its paint peeling in places, but the warmth inside unmatched by any mansion. Inside lived Daniel Hayes, a 38-year-old single father, and his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Daniel worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop, often coming home with grease-stained hands and an exhausted smile. Since his wife had passed away 5 years earlier, he had been both father and mother to Emma, pouring every ounce of his being into raising her. But times were tough. The rising rent, school fees, and daily expenses were stretching Daniel's modest income to the breaking point. He had already sold his car to cover bills, and now he faced the risk of losing the house that carried so many memories. One evening, while sipping black coffee at the kitchen table and staring at a stack of overdue bills, Daniel noticed a flyer from the college a few blocks away. Room wanted. Safe, quiet environment. He glanced toward Emma's empty playroom. She had long outgrown it, and the room now sat untouched, filled with dusty toys and old books. Maybe renting it out could help, Daniel muttered to himself. The very next week, there was a knock at the door. When Daniel opened it, he saw a young woman, probably around 19 or 20. She had long chestnut hair tied back in a ponytail, intelligent hazel eyes, and a confident but gentle air. "Hi, I'm Clara," she said with a bright smile. "I saw your ad. I'm looking for a room near the university." Daniel hesitated for a moment, still adjusting to the idea of a stranger living under his roof. But then Emma peeked from behind his leg, curious as ever. "Do you like pancakes?" Emma blurted out, making Clara laugh. "I love pancakes with extra syrup." That was enough to melt Emma's heart, and Daniel's hesitation. After showing Clara the room, she agreed to rent it immediately. She paid the first month in cash, her polite manners and down-to-earth attitude easing Daniel's worries. What Daniel didn't know was that Clara wasn't just any college girl. She was the only daughter of Edward Lawson, a real estate tycoon whose name was often in newspapers and whose wealth stretched across the country. But Clara never revealed her background. She wanted to live a normal life, away from the shadow of her father's fortune. The first weeks passed smoothly. Clara was neat, considerate, and surprisingly humble. She cooked meals sometimes and often helped Emma with her homework. Daniel, who had expected to live alongside a noisy, careless student, found himself grateful for Clara's presence. One evening, after a long day at the auto shop, Daniel returned home to the smell of spaghetti. Clara was in the kitchen, apron tied around her waist, laughing as Emma sprinkled cheese all over the counter instead of the pasta. "You didn't have to cook," Daniel said, setting his toolbox down. "You worked too hard. Besides, Emma said you forgot to eat lunch again." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. It had been years since anyone had taken care of him this way. For the first time in a long while, the house felt alive, like a family again. Despite her modest behavior, her background slipped through in subtle ways. She spoke fluent French and Italian, casually mentioned books that Daniel had never heard of, and once pulled out a laptop that looked far more expensive than anything Daniel owned. "Your parents must be proud of you," Daniel commented one night as Clara helped Emma with a science project. Clara's smile faltered. They're busy. My dad especially. He doesn't really have time for me." Daniel sensed the weight behind her words, but didn't pry. He knew too well the ache of loneliness. One rainy afternoon, Daniel came home earlier than usual to find Clara sitting on the porch steps, crying softly. "What happened?" he asked, concern filling his voice. She quickly wiped her tears. "It's nothing. Just pressure from school." But Daniel could see it was more than that. He sat beside her, not saying a word, just offering silent comfort. Emma soon joined them, slipping her small hand into Clara's. That night, Clara revealed part of the truth. "My dad, he has money, more than I'll ever need, but I don't want to live in his world of business and fake smiles. I just want to build my own life, even if it's harder." Daniel listened quietly, admiring her courage. "Money can't buy peace," he said gently. "I've learned that the hard way." Clara looked at him, realizing how different yet how similar their lives were. A millionaire's daughter, longing for simplicity, and a single father, struggling but rich in love. Weeks later, disaster struck. Daniel collapsed at work after ignoring persistent chest pain. He was rushed to the hospital, leaving Emma frightened and crying. Clara stayed by Emma's side, comforting her like an older sister. When Clara saw the medical bills piling up, her chest tightened. Daniel had no insurance, and the cost could ruin him. She made a decision. For the first time, she called her father. "Dad, I need your help. Not for me, but for someone who deserves it." Edward Lawson was stunned. His daughter rarely asked for anything. Curious, he agreed to meet this man Clara spoke of. The following evening, a sleek black car pulled up outside Daniel's worn house. Out stepped Edward Lawson himself, tall and imposing in his tailored suit. Daniel, just back from the hospital and still weak, stood in shock as Clara introduced them. "Mr. Hayes," Edward said, extending a hand, "I owe you my thanks. My daughter speaks highly of you and your little girl." Daniel blinked, utterly confused. Your daughter?" Clara stepped forward, her voice soft. "Daniel, I didn't tell you before. My dad is Edward Lawson. He's, well, a millionaire." The words hung in the air. Daniel looked from Clara to her father, then back to Clara, struggling to process it. All those little hints suddenly made sense. Edward continued. "Clara could live in any penthouse she wished, but she chose your home. She found something here that I, with all my wealth, couldn't give her. Family." Daniel's throat tightened. He wasn't sure whether to feel betrayed, embarrassed, or simply overwhelmed. Over the weeks that followed, Edward helped cover Daniel's medical bills discreetly, insisting it was the least he could do. Daniel resisted at first, but Clara reminded him it wasn't charity, it was gratitude. What surprised Daniel most was how often Edward visited afterwards. Though stern at first, the wealthy man softened around Emma, who asked him endless questions about skyscrapers and airplanes. Slowly, a bond formed between the millionaire, his daughter, the mechanic, and the little girl who tied them all together. Daniel never expected his life to cross paths with people like Clara or her father. Yet as he watched Emma laughing in the garden with Clara, he realized wealth wasn't just about money. It was about love, trust, and the unexpected families we build. A year later, Daniel's house no longer felt old and broken. It wasn't because Edward had helped fix the roof or because Clara decorated the living room with fresh flowers. It was because laughter filled every corner again. Clara had become more than a tenant. She was like a sister to Emma, a friend and confidant to Daniel, and a daughter who finally found the family she had always longed for. And Daniel, the single father who once thought he had nothing left to offer, realized he had given Clara something more precious than wealth, a home where she truly belonged.